Hello, adventurers! My name is Chance. Welcome to my spellbook, and thank you for tuning in to the first ever class guide we're doing. Heck yeah! We're gonna be starting out with the Barbarian here. And a lot of you are probably gonna ask, why don't I start with the Artificer? There's a couple reasons for this. Firstly, I feel like the vast majority of people who are gonna be watching this are going to be relatively new to D&D, or at least new to these classes in particular. So for that reason, I'd rather start out with the simpler ones. That way, as we progress, they can kind of get accustomed to it. Also, I'd rather start out with the ones that are in the player's handbook, just so people don't feel pressured to get additional books and spend extra money for classes that they might not like playing just because they haven't watched the full series, you know what I mean? Also, the Artificer is a relatively complicated class, all things considered, and I'd rather do a lot more research on it before I speak on it. And also, with Tasha's Cauldron coming out pretty soon here, I'd rather wait until after that book's out and see what changes they did to their spell list and kind of go from there. In any case, we're talking about the Barbarian for today. And honestly, I'm really surprised. I can honestly say I haven't played a Barbarian before. Not because I dislike them or anything to do with that, but more so because I typically just don't play martial classes. I've almost always been a spellcaster in almost any RPG I've played, tabletop or even digital, like video games. I'm almost always a caster when it's available, so I haven't really delved into them before. But let me tell you, after really looking at them, god damn, are they impressive. Honestly, insanely impressive. A lot of the subclasses as well, just so much flavor and utility. I'm probably going to play a Barbarian in my next game, to be honest. It would be worth just going over the quick build recommendation before we dive into it. So put your highest ability score in Strength, followed by Constitution as a second, and choose Outlander as your background. That'll set most people up, certainly most new players, as you get more comfortable with the backgrounds and the playstyle you want. Then you can kind of branch out from there. I got some interesting thoughts at the end for you guys, but without further ado, let's get started. So let's just quickly go over how your class chart looks and just talk about it a little bit. So along the far left-hand column, you'll see your level. To the right of that, your corresponding proficiency bonus. Now, if you're brand new to D&D, whenever you're proficient in something, you add this bonus to it. Helps you consistently roll a little bit higher in that area, and as you progress in levels, that number will get higher, starting out as +2 and then working your way up to +6. This chart will be at the beginning of every class. I'm not going to get too deep into the chart here, but to the right of that you have what class features you get for the corresponding levels. To the right of that you have it kind of varies from class to class. In the casters, it's your spell slots or sorcery points, and then to the right of that, whatever else pertains to your class. In the Barbarian's case, it's rages, and then your rage damage, which is extra damage you get when you crit. The Barbarians, in case you don't know, are all about taking and dealing massive amounts of damage. Various subclasses have various other niche roles for them, but for the most part, that's kind of the Barbarian in a nutshell. Now let's move on to their hit points. The Barbarians have access to the D12 for their hit points, making them have the largest hit largest hit point pool in general out of any other class, which is really cool and really goes to refine their tankiness. Your hit points at first level is 12 plus your Constitution modifier. And at higher levels, it's 1d12 or an average of 7 plus your Con modifier per Barbarian level after first, which is really I don't know, every class is basically like that, only with smaller hit dices, as I mentioned earlier. But it's really neat. Moving on to proficiencies, they are proficient in light armor, medium armor, and shields. Under weapons, they're proficient with simple weapons and martial weapons, and I'll show you those in a little bit here. And under tools, they don't get any because they're not really built to be artisans. You can, of course, get access to tool proficiencies through your background, and we have a series for that as well. And under saving throws, they're proficient in strength and constitution saves, as you might hope, right? Under skills, you can choose two. So animal handling, athletics, intimidation, nature, perception, and survival are your options. Whichever two strikes your fancy or goes with your character, go for it. There's no real wrong choices in this one, but just be sure to factor it into the overall kind of build and theme for your character. Under equipment, you get some starting equipment here. So you get either a great axe or any martial weapon. You also get access to 2 hand axes or any simple weapon, or an explorer's pack and 4 javelins. And I'll put some images up top here, starting out with the martial weapons, and then I'll show you the simple weapons as well. So feel free to pause just at any point here. So yeah, you'll know when to do it. I don't know when it is gonna be because I'm doing the recording right now before I time everything out. So yeah, just pause it whenever, whatever strikes your fancy there, and let's move on. So the first thing you get at level 1 is your bread and butter as a barbarian. You get your rage. Now, how you want to describe the rage and how it plays out thematically, that's up to you. You don't really have to go into a furious temper tantrum. It can be more subtle, like in the Warforge I want to make. I want his eyes to turn red and have like lightning shoot across his body. I think it'd be really cool, and I have the perfect archetype in mind. Just saying. I'm sure a lot of you know what it is, but or the perfect subclass in mind if you want to look at it that way. But I'll get into those in later videos, so just stick with the series and you'll figure it out. But in terms of the rage itself, it is a bonus action to activate it, and it starts for 1 minute. At least initially, you'll figure out what I mean by that in a little bit here. And it kind of scales with level. So I have this handy dandy little chart for you here. Pretty cool. So feel free to take a glance at that and your corresponding level and how it relates to how many rages you get and then what the additional damage is. The effects, however, are advantage on strength checks and saves. Melee weapon attacks using strength gain a bonus to the damage roll, which is pretty cool. Resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, which is huge, especially at those early levels. Just, if you're not already tanky enough, now most things you run into at those early levels are going to be dealing half damage to you. Fantastic stuff. Absolutely amazing. Under limitations, however, you can't wear heavy armor. It's just one of those things. You do get interesting armor later on. That's the next thing we're going to be talking about, but let's wrap up here. You also can't cast or concentrate spells while you're raging. You can, however, technically smite. A lot of people do that. Paladin, Barbarian multi-classes are ludicrously popular. They work very well together, huge amount of synergy. You can also be wild-shaped and rage, so there's huge amounts of synergy with the druid as well. Very good stuff, very cool. It also ends if you are knocked unconscious or if your turn ends and you haven't attacked a hostile creature since your last turn or taken damage since then. So there is some incentive to always be in combat. A lot of the subclasses help out with that hugely, but at early levels, just make sure you stay in the fray. And your rage is reset after a long rest. So bear that in mind. You only have a finite amount of them. So at early levels, at least, use them when it counts. At later levels, there's ways to extend the duration of your rage. And at the final level, you're basically always in a rage. So it is really cool, but just bear in mind resource management is still important for the Barbarian. Now let's talk about their unarmored defense. This kind of follows the Barbarian trope of kind of walking into battle with nothing but your own grit to protect you. So while not wearing armor, your AC is 10 plus your dexterity modifier plus your con modifier. This is really great. You should never, in my opinion, take dexterity as a dump stat, ever. Too much relies on it, and having poor dexterity, if you're constantly in the fray, will likely lead to you failing some very important roles. So, that's my opinion, of course. I've played characters with poor dex, but they always hang back, and they're spell slingers, so well, it makes sense for them. And your con modifier, abundantly important. So it makes sense that as you progress in levels, you are gonna get pretty good AC just on its own. And this is stackable with a shield as well, so if you really need some extra AC, that's how you're likely gonna get it. And all that's at level 1, right? Rage and unarmored defense are level 1. Now let's level you up to level 2 here. You get some cool stuff. The first one we're going to be talking about is reckless attack. Essentially, you can take advantage on strength-based melee attacks, focused on the strength-based melee part of that, alright, made on your turn. However, attacks made against you have advantage until your next turn. So it's one of those high-risk, high-reward scenarios. You take advantage, but they also have advantage against you. I would not recommend doing this if you're surrounded by a ton of enemies, because action economy is likely to really hurt you. That is, of course, unless you have some item or spell cast on you or something to that effect to prevent that from being a huge issue. But just bear in mind, action economy is a thing, and although you got one, you still have a lot of other enemies to worry about. Now let's move on to the second trait you get at level 2, and that is Danger Sense. Danger Sense is pretty cool. It gives you advantage on dexterity saves on effects you can see. This includes spells and traps. And this stacks really well with a Warlock Invocation Devil's Sight, which provides you 120 feet of dark vision and the ability to peer through magical darkness. There is a feat in Unearthed Arcana that I'm going to be talking about in a later video that'll technically get you access to that. It might be worth it depending on your character, but a lot of races already have dark vision, so I mean, who knows, right? Just thought it might be worth bringing up. To gain this benefit, you can't be blinded, deafened, or incapacitated, which of course makes sense, right? You have to be able to see the effect. Now let's level you up again to 3rd level now. This is where you pick your primal path or your subclass. Pick a subclass. Your subclass features are gained at level 3, 6, 10, and 14. Each subclass will be described in a subsequent video, so I'm not going to get into them here. Just be aware they are a thing, and they do change up your playstyle dramatically. They are what makes your Barbarian unique, to say the least. Now let's carry on here. The next thing we're going to be talking about is ability score improvements. They happen at levels 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19, so roughly every 4 levels until the last one there. You can do one of two things. You can increase your ability score you can increase one ability score by 2, or you can increase 2 ability scores by 1. Typically, if one's on the edge of rounding up to a higher modifier, you hit that one and push it over the edge. If not, you're probably going to be focusing on strength and constitution more than anything else. Strength is a very, very important thing to barbarians, so yeah, and constitution is just great to have, especially if you're going to be tankier. Now, there is the feats as well. They are an optional rule, Almost every DM allows them, however, so feats are extra abilities and traits you can give yourself at the cost of an ability score improvement. There's a lot of good ones for barbarians. Some of them are based around races, however, like there's one for the dwarves, and it's Dwarven Resilience, I believe. And it lets you roll one of your hit dice to get health back in combat. So it's really super useful, especially at later levels. However, most DMs are cool with them. We have a whole series dedicated to all the feats, so check that out at your leisure, of course, and see if any of them strike your fancy. If they don't, there's nothing wrong with putting it into your abilities scores. Ultimately, I don't know, it kind of depends on the campaign, but I find increasing ability scores usually it creates more of an all-round better character, where feats typically serve to add more niche elements. For example, the Ritual Caster feat is almost aimed at adding magical utility to characters, and it's almost built around the concept of having a party that's lacking magical utility. So, and the feats you might change as your character develops as well. But in any case, that's enough talking about ability score improvements. Let's move on. Let's level you up to level 5 now. So you gain an extra attack. It's pretty simple. Whenever you take the attack action, you can attack twice. You can also attack as a bonus action as well, although you don't add your modifiers to it. So just bear that in mind. And also at level 5, you gain access to fast movement. So long as you aren't wearing heavy armor, you gain an extra 10 feet of movement, which is pretty nice overall. Now, at level 6, you will gain one of your primal path features, so tune into the videos pertaining to those to kind of fill in the blank here. Leveling up again to level 7, you'll gain access to Feral Instinct, which is really cool. It reminds me of Wolverine in a lot of ways, and however you want to roleplay this is up to you. Whether or not you want to roleplay it as having a strong sense of smell, like Wolverine seems to have, or more of just an inert sense. You can, like Spider-Man would be a good example of that. You can do that as well. You have advantage on initiative rolls is kind of the flat benefit. However, there's more of an active benefit as well. So long as you are not incapacitated and enter into a rage, you are not affected by surprise rounds. So what this means is if you're caught off guard, or if your party is caught off guard and there's a surprise round, you can make the decision to use your bonus action to rage, and you can proceed through that surprise round as usual. This is really beneficial just simply for action economy reasons. If there's a lot of enemies and they have a full round to just ravage you, odds are you're not making it out of that unscathed. Feral Instinct makes that so not only are you in a position to damage or potentially kill one of your enemies, but you're also in a position to position yourself, literally, I see what I did there, but in a fashion where you are attracting the majority of the aggro. And there are some class features or subclass features rather, that really help out with that. So bear that in mind. Now let's level you up again. And at level 8, in case you don't remember, you just gain another ability score improvement. So you can either do one ability score by 2, or 2 ability scores by 1, or pick a feat, assuming your DM allows them. Now let's level you up again to level 9 here. We're about halfway done-ish. So level 9, you gain access to Brutal Critical. Now this is where the Barbarian really starts to just turn into a damage machine. At least a potential damage machine, to be fair. So roll 1 additional weapon damage die when determining the extra damage for a critical hit with a melee attack. The melee attack component, obviously pretty important. At level 9, you only gain 1 additional dice. However, at level 13, you gain 2, And at level 17, you gain 3 additional dice in addition to what you're already rolling for a critical hit. So just whatever your weapon damage dice is, make sure you got a lot of them on hand. If you are a half-orc as well, you get even more, and there's certain multi-classes that'll just really just make this disgusting, for lack of a better term. The Paladin Smite is a good example of this, and as is the Assassinate ability for the Rogue. So there's just, yeah, a lot of nonsense you can do with this particular feature. Level you up to level 10, and you'll gain access to one of your Primal Path abilities. Now let's level you up to level 11. This is Relentless Rage. This is the point where your tankiness is really gonna start to take a more prominent role on the battlefield. This is also the point where stickiness becomes an issue. So when stickiness is brought up in D&D land, what that means is your ability to attract and maintain aggro. And DMs are constantly accused of avoiding barbarians with mobs, and the reason is it gets to a point where the barbarian specializes at soaking and dishing out so much damage that they're able to compensate for the weaknesses of a lot of the other party members. And to be fair, that's their job, but a lot of the time, the challenge it's difficult for new DMs in particular to impose a challenge onto the party at that point. So Relentless Rage works as the following. If you drop to 0 hit points while you're raging and don't die outright, you can make a DC 10 con save. If you succeed, you drop to 1 hit point instead, so you're able to maintain in combat even after being dropped to 0. Each time you use this feature after the first, the DC increases by 5, resetting to 10 after a short or long rest. So you use it once, the DC's 10, you use it again 15, and then again 20, etc., etc. By level 11, odds are you have a pretty decent con modifier, so you should be able to succeed, hopefully more than once, but it's all up to the luck of the die, I suppose. If you are a half-orc, you do gain access to an ability that props you up even more, but watch the half-orc video for that. I'm not going to get too far into the meta in this one. Now let's take a look at your level 15 ability. So at level 12, just worth noting, you gain access to another ability score improvement, so go nuts there. At level 13, your brutal critical dice goes up by 1, so instead of 1, you have 2 now. And at 14th level, you gain another path feature. So once again, check out the video corresponding to whatever path you're on, and that'll help you out there. So level 15, in terms of your core barbarian traits, as it were, you gain persistent rage. And this is where your resource management doesn't really matter. So, well, I mean, I guess, I don't know, it depends on how you're playing, but for the most part, this is where it becomes less important for sure. So rage only ends if you're unconscious or you choose to end it. That 1 minute duration, no longer a thing. So if you roleplay your rage in a way where it kind of doesn't influence how you act too much, there's no real reason not to be raging. At least not by raw, right? So this topic gets brought up a decent amount. Maybe it's more of a misconception than anything else, but it's going to be worth putting a fine point on this. There's no reason to roleplay rage as aggressive. I get its name implies that in a literal sense, but rage for you, so like the Path of the Zealot Barbarian is the example I'm going to use. The rage for you might be divine protection, or it might be like a moment of almost enlightenment, I guess you could phrase it as. So in that case, when you gain persistent rage, you're in a state of constant enlightenment. And the more silly example is where Bruce Banner, in that like kind of meme-worthy moment, everyone's like, "Well, what's your secret?" And he's like, That's my secret. I'm always angry," or something to that effect. It could be done either way, but it's just don't be that jerk at the table that's always yelling, is what I'm trying to say. I see that a lot in Adventures League, and it's not. It's funny for the first bit, but it gets boring pretty quick. At least I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm just desensitized to it. It's hard to say. Now let's move on. In any case, so moving on to level 16 here, you're gonna hit this gap where not a lot happens for a couple levels. So level 16 rolls around. It's just another ability score improvement. And level 17 is just another brutal critical. So now you're up to 3 dice for brutal critical. Now at level 18, you're kind of getting to almost god tier level in terms of power. You gain indomitable might. So if your total score for a strength check is less than your strength score, you can use the score in place of the total. So what this means is, let's say at this point you have a 20 in strength, and most of you will probably be around there, and you were requested to make a strength check for like lifting a boulder, and you roll a natural 1. You can just be like, no, actually it's a 20 because my strength score is a 20, and that's about it. There's no limit on how many times you can do this, so you're not quite god tier in terms of strength, of course, but you are transcending almost every mortal you're going to come across in terms of strength. It's yeah, I don't know, abuse it at your own privilege. After 18 levels, you've earned it, goddammit, you've earned it. And level 19, you just get another ability score improvement. And level 20 is Primal Champion. This is kind of the end-all be-all when it comes to Barbarians. Level 20, that's it. It's not super exciting either for them. Your strength and constitution score increases by 4 to a maximum of 24. So odds are, if you weren't already at 20 or above in one of them, you are now kind of at least up there. You have to be, unless you're making like a Gish character or something to that effect. But that's pretty much it when it comes to Barbarians. Let me share some personal thoughts. So, the Barbarian class is one of the simpler ones to play. It's a really good introductory one for a lot of beginners, and it scales really nicely as you level. It takes very kindly to magical equipment, and it's just naturally rugged and tough and performs well at virtually every level, and it has a very consistent growth curve to it, which is nice. At higher levels, its damage potential is really impressive. There's ways to make it even more ridiculous by incorporating magic and other classes' ability, but just being a straight level 20 barbarian puts you in a class leagues above most of the creatures you're going to be running into at that point. And if you've been playing with a party for a long duration of time, odds are you've already adapted to combating each other's weaknesses and so forth. That being said, there are certainly ways to take down barbarians relatively easily, and this is the best way to address the stickiness kind of complaint regarding them. It's very rare for barbarians to have much in the way of magic resistance. Some of the subclasses do, but for the most part, it's kind of the last thing they're built for, right? They're predominantly built to soak in physical damage, and they are often, at least from what I've seen, it's more common than not for them to have intelligence as a dump stat. So if you can attack that intelligence score as opposed to attacking them outright, that's another easy way of doing it. There's a lot of illithid enemies that would do that just fine, and some of them are relatively low CR, so you could just bog them down with a mob. However, I'm kind of against targeting individual characters, but you can make it make sense in the progression of the total story by having the BBEG get sick and tired of the Barbarian just throwing goon after goon into just the dirt, and eventually they get crafty enough and come up with something like a potion that inverts their strength and intelligence, so they're ludicrously smart but just feebly weak. And then the party has to go on a quest line and stuff like that, or it's just a temporary potion that removes them from a fight or two, or makes them pursue the fight in a different way. Really cool stuff. Because I know you're gonna ask, in terms of best and worst multi-classing, you know, I'd probably avoid the full casters in terms of multi-classing into them, just because of that concentration restraint over your rage, right? That being said, if you're looking at a lot of the half casters, it works really, really well. The only exception to the full casters might be the druid, actually, and even then, you're going to want to focus primarily on wild shapes, so take that with a grain of salt. However, I find the paladin multiclass to be incredibly effective. Same with the assassin multiclass, very, very effective. And the assassin one works well with unarmored defense as well, so to bear that in mind. In addition, the champion fighter with their expanded crit range is very, very lucrative, especially if you are using a larger weapon size and getting something like a D12 of damage. Very impressive stuff there. That being said, let me know what you think of the Barbarian down beneath. This is probably the longest video on my channel by a long shot, so if you've stuck with it this far, my god, man, good on you. Seriously, you are one hell of an adventurer. My throat is killing me, by the way, so I do apologize for its raspiness. Feel free to get a free one-shot on me. Consider it a thank you, man, I tell ya. Just go to the guild hall, click on the job board, whichever one you like. There's 2 up there now, more will be added frequently. I'm going to keep the price at like $1. I think it's relatively affordable. They're pretty decent in size, so hopefully you'll get some usage out of it. That being said, let me know what you think down beneath. Mention any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns, ideas, build concepts, or cool stories involving the Barbarian. That being said, I should stop saying that. My goodness. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. I will see you later, and happy adventuring, everyone.